I mentioned in one of our earlier talks that religion, for the most part of human history, has been an organizing principle of society. We've moved from the religious model of understanding the world to the scientific model. And historically, Western European society started embracing science during the age of empiricism, or the age of enlightenment. This is the shift in thinking that happens about mid-decade in the 17th century through the 18th century, when there was dramatic revolutions in science, philosophy, society, and politics. These revolutions swept away the medieval worldview and ushered in our modern Western world and ways of thinking. When I'm talking about these organizing principles and religion, I mean too that in Western Europe, Christianity was not just a religious doctrine, but it was the bedrock of the government too. The church in many ways directed the state. This history needs to be understood as a central starting point for our discussion about religion and human sexuality. Religion has had many roles in social organization and social control. For the purpose of human sexuality, it has to some degree or another guided our views about when we should have sex, how and why we should have sex, and who we choose as a partner. To what degree it controls our sexual behavior varies from one person to another in our current society, and it's also varied some over time. And like I said before, as we've moved away from the religious model of the world, religion has had relatively less influence over our behaviors. So one way to think about religion is as a form of social control. And religion has had a strong influence over human behavior for much of human history. It's essentially been a guidebook for social norms for the majority of people for thousands of years. And as Karl Marx said, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. So what Marx was talking about was, with deplorable conditions in society, religion gave people something to believe in. And when he talks about the opium of the people, he's saying that it dulled their senses to their deplorable conditions. We've already discussed the idea of procreative sex as being part of the Judeo-Christian doctrine. That meant that homosexuality was not acceptable, and anthropologists have looked for clues as to exactly when non-procreative sex became unacceptable, and have found that around the 6th century BC, attitudes towards non-procreative sex became negative. And as I said earlier, that is probably because humans equated semen with the wondrous power of creating life, and it shouldn't be wasted on something that would not result in a child being born. So in early human history, marriage was expected for everyone, in part because it was much more critical for everyone to have children. Life expectancy in early human history was by far lower than it is today. To not have children was to put the tribe or the village in jeopardy of survival. The man's role in procreation was seen as having high importance, which is interesting considering that the female gestates the unborn child for over 8 months, and her life is put at risk during childbirth. And if you think about it some more, you might ponder why we didn't have many more goddess societies because of that. It's probably due to men's physical strength and their ability to dominate, and the need for women to invest so much of their energy in lactation after pregnancy. Just something to ponder a bit, why patriarchy emerged, which, by the way, it appears to emerge about the same time that negative attitudes about non-procreative sex start to emerge. And finally, the last note on the slide, the religious story of Sodom and Gomorrah. That actually creates the label of sodomy. Ancient Greece accepted homosexuality, and it became built into their culture by the acceptance of pederasty. That was not child abuse as we would think of it today, but instead a caring, loving, mentoring relationship between an older man that had social standing who would introduce an adolescent boy coming of age to the social order. And part of the dynamic here is that women were seen as not being worthy of male companionship. They were regulated to the home, and child rearing is their role in society. So it was St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas that defined sex as sin. St. Augustine defined sins against nature, and St. Thomas Aquinas declared that homosexual sex was worse than unnatural heterosexual sex. But today, we know that religion will have some effects on attitudes towards sex. We know that religion and the belief systems that stem from those religions will influence how people feel about premarital sex, and that people who are highly religious feel that it's more important that their sexual behavior is in conformance with their religious beliefs. So this slide explains this relationship. If you look at who is very religious, those people believe that it is very important for their sexual practices to be in harmony with their religious beliefs. That's in the upper left corner of the table. And if you look at who is less religious, they say it's not as important. And FYI, there's a typo in there. The upper right-hand cell should be 3%, not 35%. Church attendance also appears to have some correlation with the frequency of premarital sex. But at the same time, it also appears that church attendance is not the only factor, because that study found that 40% of fundamentalist teen girls and over half the number of Catholic teens are sexually active. This study also looked at sexual activity of those that read the conservative magazine Christianity Today and found that over half of these individuals had premarital sex. We also know that religion has little effect on whether people use birth control. While the Catholic Church has historically opposed contraception, urging instead for their congregants to rely on natural family planning, the Church has instead urged to use the rhythm method, which tracks the female's ovulation cycle and attempts to control contraception by avoiding sex when the woman should be ready to ovulate. But we know that practicing Catholics are only slightly less likely than others to use contraception. So it is apparent that most Catholics have used birth control, while the Church historically has taught that artificial methods of birth control should not be used. Studies have also made it clear that while many people feel that religion is an important part of their lives, there appears to be other factors that play a major role in shaping their sexual attitudes. So religion is really just one of the many factors that determines our sexual behaviors. You might want to ponder the questions in this last slide. How your own attitudes were shaped by religion. If you're familiar with the story of Adam and Eve, you might consider how this very basic story, the Judeo-Christian teaching of how human life was created, is steeped in patriarchy, and whether these teachings perpetuate a society that treats men and women differently.